So from an existential perspective, we wouldn't say that didn't matter. We would say, well, of course it matters. The context in which you are born matters enormously. The context of the time and the place always matter. And even within those limits, what choices do you have? I know I'm really lucky to have had the opportunities I've had. My siblings are bright, smart people. My parents were fantastically clever, but my dad was a labourer his entire life. Died at 67, had a couple of years off when he was retired. That was it.
Wow.
He hated being a labourer. With a ruptured brain aneurysm, there was literally nothing to do except not move. As the doctor in A&E said, no, you can't get up and go to the toilet. You might still die. I literally just had to lie flat to stop, well, to try and make the bleeding out that was happening in the hemorrhage in my brain less awful until they could get me into surgery. And since that moment, rather than just knowing that my death is somewhere down the line, I really feel like my death is me. So your podcast about relationships, and I think my relationship is with my death. It's societal attitudes to being an older woman. It's societal attitudes to becoming infertile again. We were infertile before we had puberty, and we don't go around telling 8-year-old girls that their lives are worthless.
No, we do not.
Then we have this fertile period where we suddenly come into our value as women. This is a quite old-fashioned view, but it's still very strong in our culture.
Yes.
And out the other side, there's this whole, well, what are they good for now?
Hello and welcome to How to Have Extraordinary Relationships podcast with me, Lucy Cavendish. And today I'm very excited to be with Dr. Stella Duffy. She's a doctor, Dr. Stella Duffy. We did talk about hurrah! She's actually got a doctorate, which is amazing.
Well, getting a doctorate, I mean, I only did my foundation at 55, so getting a doctorate at 60 was absolutely thrilling, yeah. And as I just mentioned to you before we started recording, I'm not just the first in my family to go to university. I'm the first in my family to finish secondary school. So, and while others of my nieces and nephews have gone on to do lots of great things since then, but in my generation, I was the first. So it's a really big deal to have a doctor in front of my name now. And certainly never anything I expected. I didn't expect to ever turn my hand to academic work. So, yeah, it's joyous.
It's really just so we're going to talk about that in a bit, but I just want to say, I mean, people might know you wearing many different hats actually, because you do wear many different hats, like many people do actually.
Yep.
So you've been a novelist, you've written lots and lots and lots of novels, or like so many.
17 novels, about 75 short stories, 15 plays, and lots of articles and stuff. But I am 63. You know, I've been working since I was 17. People talk about it like it's a lot, but actually, because I've never had a proper job, you know, the kind where you have PAYE and holiday pay and sick pay and compassionate leave, and I've always worked for myself. I've had to do lots of different things, and I was an actor for a long time and a theatre director and an improviser. So yeah, I just sort of feel like I'm coming into my absolute creative blossom in my 60s.
I mean, it's amazing. So there's 70, I mean, there's all this. I mean, that is basically over a book a year, right? I mean,
Well, no, because
that's a lot of output.
My first novel came out when I was 31. And then I did write a little bit of a book a year, but more like a book every 2 years. My last novel came out in 2021, so it's 5 years now while I've been doing my doctorate. It was never a book a year, but it was sometimes a book every 18 months, yeah.
Yeah, so you're very creative. You've got an OBE, you work in the charity sector, you work very creatively.
Yeah.
You're an existential therapist, and I'm going to, I'm asking you this now, actually. Lots of people come into therapy and quite understandably have no idea what any of the,
No, sure. Of course not. Why would they?
Yeah, they don't.
Yeah.
They don't. So, can you tell us a bit about existential therapy? Because I'm not an existential therapist, but I'm very interested in it.
Yeah, okay. So I didn't know anything about existential therapy myself. So I've been to therapy three times in my life. The first time in my 20s, mid-20s, when my dad died very suddenly in his 60s, and the nightmares wouldn't go away. And I suddenly realized where human beings invented zombies from. Oh, it was because we were terrified they were going to get out of the grave and come and chase us. And I found a therapist. I didn't know or care about their modality. In my 30s, I had my first experience of cancer, and I found a cancer therapist then who did do some existential work, but didn't call it that at the time. And then when I turned 50, I had my second cancer and was getting on. I'd founded a UK-wide organisation that supported community culture. I was part of the original steering group of the Women's Equality Party. And I was basically running away from the fact that I was having cancer for the second time by the age of 50, running myself into the ground like lots of us do, particularly lots of women. And it wasn't a breakdown as in I couldn't function because I'm very high functioning, like a lot of people that we know, Lucy. I just was at the end of my tether. And I rang the hospital where I'd been treated for my second breast cancer. And they found a therapist for me, and then that one didn't work out. And then they found another therapist for me. And on the morning I was going to see her, they rang and said, "Oh, she's not available now." In retrospect, maybe there was a bereavement, maybe someone got ill. We don't always tell the clients those things. I do tell my clients what's going on. And then I remember really clearly, I was in the street and I said to the young woman on the phone, "I don't care, just find me someone." And she said, "Well, we've got somebody for you, but it's a man and he's a lot younger than you." And I was like, "I don't care. I didn't ask for a woman. I didn't ask for someone my
That's so
age."
interesting, isn't it? She thought you needed a woman because you had
Well,
breast cancer.
maybe somewhere on my notes it had suggested that would be a good idea. I certainly hadn't asked for it. Anyway, I turned up and what I got was an existential therapist. And I had never come across this possibility before. The idea that it's not that we're not interested in your awful childhood or the terrible things that happened to you before you were 25 or whatever. We are, of course, all therapists are. But from an existential perspective, what we're really interested in is what's going on here and now, what's happening to you now, what choices have you made that have got you here, what choices do you want to make that are going to get you forwards, where would you like to change, and where are you stuck? And I think lots of therapists are interested in that. I don't think that's purely existential, but it brings an existential philosophical thinking to it, which is very much about each of us is responsible for our own lives. And it's also, I've been practicing Buddhism for a long time. It's a very Buddhist attitude that, yes, difficult things happen. You and I are both white women. Neither of us experience what it's like being black in Britain today.
Yeah.
So from an existential perspective, we wouldn't say that didn't matter. We would say, well, of course it matters. The context in which you are born matters enormously. The context of the time and the place always matter. And even within those limits, what choices do you have? So let's pay attention to the context. Let's pay attention to what is going on. In my case, my second cancer, when that was happening. But within those contexts, what choices do you have? So rather than, I want to say this as nicely as possible, because I'm not suggesting that other therapists buy into people's difficulties, but I do think a lot of the self-help books do. And they sort of go, "Oh, poor you, it's so terrible, you can't be helped." Whereas existential,
it's a terrible message to give someone.
I really think it's a terrible message to give anybody.
Terrible message to say to someone. You are utterly, screwed. Excuse me.
Totally. And I think if you look at the self-help bookshelves, there's an awful lot of them that are telling people all these terrible things happened to you. This is dreadful. Poor you. Rather than this is dreadful. Poor you. And what choices do you want to make? So we're not pretending things can't be hard. We are acknowledging that they're really hard. And actually, in all lives, really hard things happen. And the other thing that existential therapy likes to do is not pretend that we're not all going to die.
Well, I think that's also very, I think that is so important.
So do I.
But my mother at 92 keeps saying, I wonder what I'll be doing in 10 years' time. And I'm like, okay, like, where are we at with the death thing? You know?
Yeah, totally. Well, good. I mean, because if she's not thinking about it, you certainly need to. Um, I think because I had my first cancer at 36, well, my dad died when I was 25, my sister died when I was 18.
Oh
I'd
my
had a
goodness.
lot of deaths around me,
Mm.
but I hadn't looked at my own mortality. And I think quite often we think, oh, I know about death because somebody I love very much died. I don't think we do. I think we know about being alongside death, and it's not quite the same thing as facing our own death. And I now know that because, as well as two cancers, nearly 3 years ago, I had a ruptured brain aneurysm, which completely came out of the blue.
Mm.
And in that, so with cancer, I'm not underplaying this. My cancers were horrible. My first cancer made me menopausal and infertile at 36, just when we were trying to have children. It was absolutely ghastly. My second cancer came and slapped me in the face when I was really enjoying a whole bunch of great work things. But there was things to do. There was chemo, there was surgery, there was radiotherapy, there were drugs to take. With a ruptured brain aneurysm, there was literally nothing to do except not move. As the doctor in A&E said, no, you can't get up and go to the toilet. You might still die. I literally just had to lie flat to stop, well, to try and make the bleeding out that was happening in the hemorrhage in my brain less awful until they could get me into surgery. And since that moment, rather than just knowing that my death is somewhere down the line, I really feel like my death is me. So your podcast about relationships, and I think my relationship is with my death. In the same way that my life is mine, my death is mine. And from an existential therapy perspective, we are very clear no one else can die for us.
Mm.
You know, no one else can ever hold that for us. You know how when you're in physical pain, and I've had a lot of pain to do with all sorts of post-treatment problems. My wife loves me very much, but my pain stops at the edge of my skin. You know, she can't hold that for me.
Mm.
And just in the same way, no one else can hold my death. And so, what I think that I have got from both existential therapy, I went on to have a lot more existential therapy than just the few sessions that were offered by the hospital, and then decided to train in it because I love it.
Mm.
What I got from it is this really clear perspective on the value of knowing my death is real, on the absolute choice to live every day. And by that, I don't mean, so I'm going to fill every day up. I used to mean that.
Oh yeah, no, don't do that.
Yeah.
But, I think people should do less. I keep banging on about this.
I think I should do less. I'm rubbish at it, but I'm getting there. So after my first cancer, I just did more work. And after my second cancer, I just did more work.
The universe is going, stop working so hard.
Truly, seriously, and because I really felt the passing of time. I really felt, oh my God, I don't have forever. So I've got to achieve all of this. I've got to get all of this done. And now my practice is to learn how to do less, to pause more often, to rest, and to not fill up my time. I'm not very good at it yet. It's definitely a practice, like running or going to the gym is a practice. Learning to use the time I have generously and with some self-compassion. The discipline of self-compassion. That's the thing that I'm trying to learn.
That's a great book. Yeah.
I think it might take the rest of my life, but however long I've got, but that's okay. Yeah.
Do you know why you're such a doer?
I think I do. So I think I'm such a doer because I'm the youngest of 7 kids.
Wow.
Because both of my parents had to leave school at 14. They were both born in 1921. They both joined up. My dad was I grew up in Aotearoa, New Zealand. My dad was a New Zealander who came to fight fascism in 1939. met my mum, who got bombed out of 3 different houses during the Second World War, and was in the army herself, and then had 7 kids. Um, there was no money for them to stay at school. They didn't not finish secondary school because they're stupid or lazy. They didn't finish secondary school because my siblings all left school and got jobs at 15 or 16. I was really lucky. I got to stay at school long enough to go on to university later. And I don't think we talk about the deep privilege of education anywhere near enough. And you and I are both therapists. The privilege of training. I mean,
Yeah.
it's phenomenally expensive for a start. I could
Yeah.
never have afforded it until I was in my 50s. So I know I'm really lucky to have had the opportunities I've had. My siblings are bright, smart people. My parents were fantastically clever, but my dad was a labourer his entire life. Died at 67, had a couple of years off when he was retired. That was it.
Wow.
Um, he hated being a labourer. He just didn't ever get any chances. And my mother did, you know, she couldn't even type. She worked in offices, but they were both really involved in their community, and they were both really concerned about social justice, civil liberty, and I think for me, I always had a sense that because I had the good fortune of getting an education, I was supposed to give back. I wasn't supposed to just use it for me.
Mm.
So, Fun Palaces, the organisation I co-founded the year I had my second cancer when I was 50, is now being led by other people, but it's an organisation that supports communities to run their own creative events. It's not that flying the Philharmonic isn't a nice thing sometimes, flying it into the poor areas, but the poor areas have got millions of wonderful people. Let's just support the wonderful people that are there to do what they want to do, to
Yeah.
support the community creativity they want to do. Let's stop telling them that they're deprived and it's screwed and start saying, what can we do to help you
Yeah.
be who you are, rather than needing to bring in the stars from Manchester or London or Birmingham or wherever, you know?
I think that's really interesting, isn't it? We can fly in the Philharmonic and it's wonderful and they're
Yeah,
great.
yeah, of course, of
But
course.
everyone's yeah, but really it's saying, you're never going to do that. I mean, I mean, unless I don't know, unless a bolt like
Well, you see, this
happens to
is the
get a chance.
problem with the whole story about the arts being for geniuses. So, Mozart, you ask anybody, they'll go, oh, no, of course Mozart was a genius. Mozart's dad made him a scale model violin when he was 3. Mozart's dad was Austria's best violin teacher.
Well,
We,
yeah, okay, I didn't know that. Now
but
I understand it.
if
Yeah.
you and I had a scale model violin at 3, and our parent was the country's best violin teacher, we'd probably be adequate at the violin too. And
Yeah.
apparently, Mozart's sister was a better composer than him at the age of 11, but we haven't got her works, have we? No, she's a girl. Grieg's mother was Norway's best piano teacher. People travelled across Norway to go to Bergen, where he was born. We don't know who's a genius because we're not educating everyone equally. We don't know who's amazing because we're not supporting everyone equally. And from a therapeutic perspective, we don't know what people can offer because we're not letting everybody know that they're brilliant and that they too have genius and that they too could contribute if they ever got a chance. So many people, a friend of mine when I was doing my training, he was working in a GP service, and he said, these people, they don't need a therapist, they need a housing officer.
Yeah, listen, I get that.
And
I get that.
it struck me so hard. So many of the problems that people come to therapy with, and this will only be obviously from our low cost services, are problems to do with just making ends meet, you know? So I think one of the reasons I do so much is because I'm super aware that I'm incredibly fortunate.
Yeah. But you get cancer at 36.
Yeah.
So, I mean, was there a why me moments? I mean, I haven't, touch wood. I've been with people that have, but I haven't, touch wood, had cancer.
I- no, not really. So I had another piece of good fortune was that I'd had my Buddhist practice for a while by then, maybe for already 10 years by then.
Mm.
And Oh, definitely 10 years. So it would have been 13, 14 years by then. And I remember saying to a Buddhist friend that I was finding it really hard. And they said, we were talking about the why me idea.
Yes.
And they said, well, why not you? And
Yeah.
and also, who else would you give it to?
Mm,
And
yeah.
nobody. I would have given what I went through then, and particularly actually because for me, becoming infertile when we were trying to have children, my wife and I with our baby father, was actually much harder than having cancer, than being menopausal at such a young age.
Mm.
We'd been, we were a young gay couple and we were building towards having children with our baby father, who was a dear friend, and everything was in place. And we knew that all of us were fertile because we'd all had the tests. And this is sort of before the lesbian baby boom. I mean, it's much more common now. It really wasn't back then. And even now, it's not super easy. Um, but just at the point that literally my wife was going for her first insemination was the day I had my first biopsy. And later that year, she did get pregnant and she miscarried and she never got pregnant again either. And so this dream of motherhood that I had always just assumed I would get, like lots of people who are childless not by choice, and we don't realize that it's a privilege. I'm not saying it's not hard to be a mother once you are a mother, I get that.
Mm.
But the great good fortune of just getting pregnant because you want to, and
Mm.
just staying pregnant because you want to, for the amount of us who miscarry, who live through infertility, people with secondary infertility, who have a child and then can't have another and they really want more, particularly in our culture that tells you you don't have a proper family unless you have one, two, three. I think you've got four
I've
children.
got four, but that's
Yeah.
mad. My sister had seven
Well,
pathologically.
my sister, who's the next up one from me, she had four, and her daughter's got five. I think some people, if you grow up with a lot, you understand a lot, but it doesn't happen for everybody.
And I know.
And not every physical body can do it, and not every life can do it. And so that was definitely hard, and it took a lot of work in therapy and personally for me to deal with. I mean, a kind of so pronatalism is the idea that it's better to be a parent than not. And it's a kind of perfectly understandable idea in humanity because we want to
Well,
keep the species
yeah,
going, right? But
getting a bit funny right now with
well, it is.
where it's being used
Yes, I
politically.
mean it's very dodgy where it's being, particularly by
Yeah.
the Christian right in America, very dangerously.
Yeah.
But I do understand why most people in humanity would think, it's a good enough thing to be a parent because you want to keep going the species and you love the person you're with and your body wants to replicate, blah, blah, blah. Um, but part of the difficulty is that those of us who can't have children have also been influenced by the pronatalism of our culture. And so, just in the same way that I had to dig out my internalized homophobia as a gay woman who grew up in a mononormative heterosexual culture, I've had to dig out my internalized pronatalism, the part of me that thought I wasn't a graduate woman because I wasn't a mother. I'd taken that in from our culture. I'd taken it in from our society. The amount of people every politician who says, well, as a parent,
Yeah.
as a
Yeah. Yeah.
mother,
I know. I
and
know.
it's like,
Yeah.
and also, you'll never know love like this until you become a parent. I don't doubt that when you are holding your first child in your arms or your eighth, you feel a kind of love that I have not felt. I don't doubt that.
I don't know if that's true, but
Well, yeah,
how can we tell?
but I
If we
believe
haven't.
people when they say they
Yeah,
feel
I
it, right?
understand. Yeah.
But by the same token, I could say to you, you'll never know how important life is until you're having a ruptured brain aneurysm and a brain hemorrhage
Yeah.
and dying. And no one wants that. So we can't compare our experiences as if my experience will be one that you'll learn from, or your experience will be one that I should have exactly the same in order to understand how to live. Each of our experiences just have to be the ones that feed us. And to come back to the existential thinking,
Yes.
in our choosing. What do I choose for me? What do I want for me? Who am I becoming? Because we're never set, right? We're never stuck. I was listening to, I think it was your interview with Sean Phillips, the podcast, which I thought was really interesting. Particularly in terms of doing lots of different work before
Yes.
coming into therapy,
Yes.
like you have, like Sean has. And the idea that we're never stuck. You know, if any of us sort of go, well, this is all I am, it is always possible to begin to dream ourselves beyond what feels like insurmountable barriers. We might change them a tiny bit, we might change them enormously. But I mean, Nelson Mandela is the best version of that, right? 25 years on Robben Island, and he still kept dreaming forwards. Now,
Yes.
that's phenomenal.
Yes, it is phenomenal. It
And I
is.
don't think I don't imagine it was easy either. But the depth of spirit it must have taken for that.
So when you've been ill,
Mm.
the cancer, the brain aneurysm, the brain hemorrhage, osteoporosis, chronic pain, is there a point when you think, oh, I just give up? Do you think, oh, I don't know, I'm a Buddhist, you know, you know, maybe it's time, maybe, you know, maybe I'm okay or not. Maybe I'm okay going to whatever's next.
Yeah, but I like work. This is the thing. So my dad hated his work. He was a labourer. He hated it. He was a boilerman. In his coffin. So this was the timber mill where my parents found work as economic migrants when they moved. I was 5. We moved from a council estate in Woolwich in southeast London to a small timber town in New Zealand in Aotearoa, which is the Maori name for New Zealand. And my dad was a boilerman. In his coffin, his hands had the kind of burn scars where your skin goes smooth. And that was because if the boilers that ran this massive mill were fine, my dad would read a novel or a biography a night because he did night shift often. But if the boiler wasn't fine, he and his colleagues climbed into these huge boilers to fix them. They were enormous. I love my work. I write, I work with clients, I run workshops. It's all a joy. And so I like taking time off. We went to the New Forest a couple of weekends ago. That was glorious. I love the sea. The sea is my safe space. The larger the ocean, the better. So the Pacific, that's definitely my safe space. I like being by the water. I like being in forests. Yesterday, I spent 4 hours getting my garden ready for some summer planting. I like having my hands dirty. But I love connection with other human beings and the work that I do, both as a therapist and as a writer and teaching. I'm teaching where I did my doctorate now. I love all of that connection.
Yeah. It's not your time yet then.
Well, it's not my time. It's not my time to stop. I think it might be getting towards a time when I want to work out how I do less. That might not be other people's version of less, but my version of less. Yeah.
So just moving into your doctorate,
Yeah.
because I think it's really important. I was watching you talk on, I mean, on YouTube.
Mm.
And it was great. So it's about, you know, you said it's about the post-menopause, and you went through menopause in your 30s because of cancer, and the treatment put you into early menopause.
Yeah. So the 6 months of chemotherapy. Before I started chemo, I said to my oncologist, "So what's this going to do to my body?" And he was like, "Well, probably an 80% chance that you'll be infertile out the other side." And I was like, "Oh, okay." And I looked horrified. I think he didn't realise that this lesbian couple beside him were going to want children. And I went, "But we're trying to have children." And at which point he went, "Oh, well, maybe 70%. Anyway, I mean, and this is in 2000. They are slightly better at it now, and they don't always give that regime of chemotherapy that I had. And cancer treatment in general has got better, and hopefully bedside manners have got better. But anyway, it screwed my fertility and it made me menopausal. And so when in the past sort of 10 years, it's as if a raft of people suddenly turned 50 and went, oh my God, this thing happens. And it's
Oh,
never
that's
happened to
right.
anyone else
Suddenly,
before.
yeah. Yeah. It's so you're like, oh, right, okay, yeah.
Yes. Now, I am not at all denying the fact that for too long we didn't say anything about menopause. I did have a mother who talked about these things. So, but I also asked questions. And I knew in my teens that I was gay, which meant that I had conversations with my parents that I think a lot of my heterosexual same age peers didn't. I told my parents things that maybe probably my siblings didn't tell them about their own straight lives. And then my parents told me things about their lives in
Mm.
return. And I did ask my mum about menopause. Quite often I hear women say, oh, my mother told me nothing, like it's their poor mother's fault again. And I'm like, well, you're 35 now. Why didn't you ask her?
Yes, where's the yeah, I mean, my mother's never spoken of it. When I have asked her, she says, "What are we doing to speak about that?" I'm like, okay, you know.
Sure, and yes, that might be the answer. Absolutely. But I think it is also, it's a two-way street.
Yes, get
We
curious.
could show interest in their experience.
Yes.
And whether or not they want to talk about it, we could still go back and go, are you sure it was nothing? What was
Mm.
it? Did you ever find yourself anxious, disappointed, distressed in ways that you hadn't been before? Anyway, so to cut a long story short, when it came to doing the doctorate, this is how new the whole thing of academia was to me. Um, Hopefully, some of your listeners will have done a literature review because they did a dissertation with their masters, or I didn't even know the term 6 years ago. I had never heard of this thing that you're supposed to do where you read all the papers that exist about the thing that you're interested in, and then you go, but they've missed this bit. I didn't even know about that. I didn't know that when you did a doctorate, you had to research what everyone else had done and then do your own thing. I thought you just did some research in a thing that you cared about. Seriously, I was so naive. And but brilliantly, the school I went to really supported me, so that was fantastic. Because actually, they're used to people, because a lot of the students are overseas students, and a lot of the students are coming to it much later in life, and so they're used to supporting people who aren't just going, bachelor's, master's, doctorate. I've got it all by the time I'm 30.
Yeah.
So that was good. But I looked at doing, so I thought, well, what am I interested in? I'm really interested in cancer, obviously, and creativity, because I think that I was supported through my cancers by having a creative approach to how I was going to keep living. And I was interested in that.
Mm.
And then I thought a bit more about it and thought, I might have to now spend 3 years researching this. And I thought, oh yeah, it's all still too close. And I was really interested in infertility, and that also felt just too close.
Mm.
And then I realized, well, I've been postmenopausal for a very long time. And just at the point that I was starting my research, I think Mariella Frostrup had done her thing. I think maybe Davina had done one of the first ones she did on the telly, but certainly there just wasn't the big swathe of material there has been. But they were all about perimenopause and menopause. They were all about just being the throes of the transition.
Yes,
And
yes.
I'd been out the other side for a long time. And my experience of being out the other side is it's brilliant. It's like having the energy of being 9 years old again, just in a much older body. There's none of the up and down fluctuations of our hormonal cycle that many of us had all the way through our teens and 20s. Yes, it's a transition. And like puberty, like my transition to being okay about my infertility from having been really not okay, like the transition that many women go through pregnancy and motherhood. People don't just dive into motherhood and go, oh, it's all brilliant and easy. It's really complicated. You lose the life that you had, and you have to come to having the life that you've got now and find your way to accommodate it. That's what menopause is. It's a transition. And in postmenopause, and there are so many cultures around the world who know this and take it seriously and give respect to older women. In postmenopause, certainly the women in my research and the women in the global research that I found, other than the difficulties of simply aging, which always get conflated with the difficulties of menopause. We're constantly telling women in their mid 40s to mid 50s, oh, it's all menopause, when sometimes it's societal attitudes to aging, it's societal attitudes to being an older woman, it's societal attitudes to becoming infertile again. We were infertile before we had puberty, and we don't go around telling 8-year-old girls that their lives are worthless.
No, we do not.
Then we have this fertile period where we suddenly come into our value as women. This is a quite old-fashioned view, but it's still very strong in our culture.
Yes.
And out the other side, there's this whole, well, what are they good for now? They're not beautiful, they're not young, they're not fertile. Well, fuck that, basically.
Yeah, I mean, you're supposed to be on the outside of the village, putting chickens' feet into things and
exactly
eye of newt and whatever.
And we need to, partly because the average age for menopause globally is 48. The average age for menopause in British women is 51. And we are getting an older and older population. We've always had people live to be very old, but we've never had this many people live to be very old. It's going to become quite soon that we will be living a third of our lives in postmenopause, longer than we were in our reproductive period, which means we need to get good at supporting postmenopausal women, not just to put up with being postmenopausal. Whether your body can take hormone therapy or not, mine can't after 2 breast cancers, but also some bodies can't. It's not great with blood clots, it's not great with various things. It can be really beneficial for some bodies and not for all bodies. Weightlifting, on the other hand, is beneficial for all the bodies that can manage it, but living with chronic pain, I do weightlift and I have to get over the pain stuff. So there are things we can do even if we can't take medication. But we've got to get better at telling women that the rest of your life is of value and that you can thrive in the rest of your life. So the book comes out next February. It's called Being the Change, and I'm really proud of my title, though I've had to explain, because I don't think young women know that our grandmothers called menopause the change. And it was whispered about when it was talked about, and it was, the change, that she's going through the change. So I'm really embracing the idea of the change. I'm not certain it's not actually, because the word menopause was only invented in 1821, and it was invented by a French doctor who wanted to get some more women to come to his clinic. So I'm not certain that the change isn't a better title for menopause, actually, because yes, it's the cessation of our periods, but it is a change. It's a huge change in what else we can focus on and how we can be. And I think it's a really important time of life for coming into, well, this is definitely the end of my life. It's the last third, it's the last quarter. How do I want to live it?
What did you find in your research? How did women, I mean, for me and for lots of other women, I mean, I think the problem, well, there are many problems, but one of the issues around menopause is all sorts of stuff comes together all at the same time. Not for everybody. Obviously, you went through this earlier.
Yep.
But, parents are getting older and dying.
Yep.
If you've got children or children around you, they're leaving home. Financially, it's a bit tricky. Maybe getting divorced and losing 50% of your money.
Totally.
And then someone says, oh, do you think, are you feeling menopausal? And you just want to go, I don't even know where to start with that conversation.
So one of the big problems I think that shows up in my research and in quite a lot of the very big studies, there's a couple of absolutely massive studies. One of them is 15,000 women across 4 different continents. One of them is all of the different ethnicities of the United States. So these are big, big studies. And what they show is 2 main things. One is every individual menopause is different. It is different in every different physical body. There is no one type of menopause, not even within ethnic groups.
Wow. Yeah.
But the other one is that it's never just the hormones. It's getting old in a culture that hates old people. It's having your body change in a culture that likes us to believe that our bodies should never change and they should ideally stay the same size they were when you were, 22 or 25 or whatever, that your face should look the same, that your hair shouldn't ever change colour. It's about changing in a culture where our culture really wants us to pretend that anything can ever be static. At the same time, we know that women are still bearing the vast majority of all of caring responsibilities, both for children and elderly parents and wider family. And right now, given the difficulty for young people of leaving home and
Yeah.
getting their own home, you've got this sandwich generation of women aged sort of 40 to 60 whose kids have moved back in after they've been off to university or wherever, and they're in their 20s, and they're looking after an aged parent or two or great aunt or whatever. And the burden continues to follow. And yes, of course, not all men, but even so,
Yes.
all the studies show us that that burden of caring across the board falls to women much more than it ever falls to men. So we've got a culture that hates old people. We've got a culture that doesn't like women very much in the first place anyway. We've got a culture that doesn't ever want anything to change, ever. And we've got a culture that still thinks that women are best placed for caring at the same time as our estrogen supplies are going down, and estrogen is your nurturing hormone. So you are asked to look after even more people at the point when your body's going, nah, don't think so. Quite rightly, your
I think
body is
that's
going,
really
nah,
interesting.
don't think so. See, the
Yeah.
grandmother hypothesis, which is interesting anthropological thinking, medical anthropology, looked at why human beings kept menopausal women alive. Lots of species, the female dies once she stops being reproductive. We're discovering that there are more and more that don't. So there's the whales and there's the
Oh yeah,
chimps.
whales live forever, and elephants.
Yeah, and there's quite a few others, but largely until we'd started looking
Oh
into it,
no,
because
they're like, you're done now.
yeah,
Bye
that's
bye.
right.
Off you go.
So first of all, this was called the grandmother hypothesis, with a belief that in a hunter-gatherer culture, the women have to go out gathering, and gathering is not just wandering around going, oh, there's a lovely sunflower, I'll pluck it. It's actually hard physical work. So you leave the babies home with the grandmother. What we know better now is that actually what probably was happening is the grandmothers were also going out hunting and gathering. Everyone was co-parenting, allo-parenting those children. The hunters were going off briefly and they were coming back, and they too were doing some of the agriculture. So it's much less that the old women were used to look after the babies. The old women had the knowledge because they had been doing this for generations, and the old women's knowledge was respected and listened to and given kudos. And that's probably why, in terms of our evolution, women were able to keep living after, unlike various other species where we died off after we stopped being fertile. So it's called the grandmother hypothesis, but I think it would be better called, I don't know, great aunt hypothesis would work too. Or barren old lady aunt would also, lesbian aunt would also work. It's just who's got the knowledge, and do the old women have the knowledge? Yes, they do. And there are cultures that already know that. I mean, high Mayan Guatemalan women change the smocking on their tops because they want people to see that they are older women and menopausal women, because they are given respect. Because I grew up in Aotearoa, and because my small town had a very high population of Māori and other Polynesian people, I grew up knowing that older women were respected and were to be respected and to be given respect simply by virtue of them being older women. There are plenty of cultures where older women have always been respected. We're just not very good at it ourselves.
So in terms of the book, you're talking about, being the change, and it's embracing your third age.
Yeah, it is. It's so various different things came up. What it was like to be othered, what it was like to become invisible in the street, to be an old lady who no one does serve at the bar. And what came up a lot in the interviews was both the joy of being invisible, you get away with a hell of a lot, and that you can choose to be visible by how you appear, how you dress, or how you insist on being heard. We can have choices around this. Some interesting stuff came up about sex, actually, because the myth, the story is that we don't want sex when we're postmenopausal. And yes, a couple of the women said they'd sort of gone off, but most of them said they came back in postmenopause to feeling very passionately sexual again. And while their bodies had changed and the things they wanted had changed, they hadn't entirely lost their sexual drive, and that they maybe wanted to do different things sexually. There's a really interesting study with some older Iranian women, where they interviewed older Iranian women. And, we have to be really careful as women in Britain, where we have the privilege of free contraception,
Yeah.
of saying menopause is terrible for everyone. For the vast majority of women, in the global majority, menopause is freedom from unwanted pregnancy. And these older Iranian women, a couple of them, yes, some of them said it was difficult for the same reasons we might find it, but a couple of them said they had conversations with their husbands they had never been able to have before about the sex they wanted, because they didn't have to worry about getting pregnant. And I found that really moving, that we might find other ways of being sexual. We might find ways of being sexual that suit our bodies rather than are about getting pregnant or about not getting pregnant. And so the women in my study definitely talked about getting a resurgence of sexual drive. They talked about their connection with other women being enormously important. Difficulties in the workplace. Some reported some quite horrendous difficulties in the workplace to do with them being older rather than menopausal per se. And while we might think we've got policy about that, it doesn't stop us having ageist workplaces when we live in an ageist culture. Largely, though, and these women were all fully into postmenopause, so they've been postmenopausal for at least 5 or 10 years.
Yeah.
Largely, they were talking about it being a time of new growth, a time of really reevaluating their lives, really wanting to understand who they were, as they were either in their late 50s coming into their 60s or in their early to mid 60s, and looking forward to the kind of properly old woman they wanted to be and how they were going to take care of themselves to get there.
Yeah, so that is the sort of, in the book, it's sort of helping women, saying actually, there's a lot to like, there's a lot to embrace.
And that's, if you're lucky, there's probably quite a lot of time. You might have 20 or 30 years postmenopausal. So how are you going to choose, back to the existential thinking, what are you going to choose to do with it? What do you want? And because I come from a writing background, I've got some writing exercises in there, some drawing exercises so people can have a play, see what they want to, and they're all just, try this, if it works for you, give it a go. If it doesn't, give it a go. There's little exercises around anxiety. I think, and I know Sian Phillips said this in your podcast with her, I think from an existential perspective, we love anxiety. We don't think it's a terrible thing. We don't think it needs to be shut up. We're not saying it feels great. I don't say that. But we really believe from an existential perspective that anxiety is our bodies when we feel anxious, or our minds when we're thinking and ruminating anxiously, reminding us that we are alive and that our choices matter. And our anxiety is a clue that there's something we need paying attention to. And quite often, our culture just wants us to get up, go to work, get on with it, feed the kids, do this, do that. Don't pay attention to what's going on in your heart. Don't pay attention to your gut. Don't listen to yourself. From an existential perspective, anxiety is saying, well, your life is going to end. You are going to die. Is this what you want? Is this what you want every day?
The life that you're currently living.
Any life, full stop. All of it is going to stop.
When you say this to people, as I keep banging on about this to my children, and they're like, can you stop talking about dying? I must tell you, I'm not doing this every day, but I'm saying to them, I'm making choices.
Good.
Difficult choices. You may not like the choices I'm making, but they're important to me to make because I don't have forever left.
No, well, Lucy, none of us is promised tomorrow.
No, so I don't.
We just don't know that.
Yeah,
we live in a culture.
I want to live the life I want to live. If it means people don't like it,
Exactly.
Kind of tough.
We live in a culture where we say, bye, darling, see you this evening. Let's have a chat about what we want for dinner when we text later. I
Yes.
don't know that that's going to happen. And because this body in which I live has experienced very clearly, very strongly,
Mm,
the promise that I don't know what's going to happen, that I'm going to come home every evening,
mm,
I am much more aware that we use language and we behave and we talk about ourselves as if we're going to go on forever, and we're not. So there's a gift in that. There's a real, oh, so do I want to spend this half hour scrolling through Instagram? Sometimes I do. Sometimes that is my choice. But might I prefer to go for a walk and look at some nice trees? Yeah, probably. Noticing that individual time is finite, I think is super useful. And yeah, maybe your kids don't want to hear you saying that you're going to die because they love you and they can't bear to picture that.
I
But, and
know.
at least you're getting them ready for the day when you're not here and
Mm,
you can't be looking after them and loving them. And hopefully they will have heard you say often enough, there's one day when I'm not going to be here and I want you to remember that I love you.
yes.
That stuff is gold. It's
Yes. It's
absolute
really
gold.
important. Yes. So what you're saying you're going to change your life, you think a bit, but you love working, you love what you do.
Yeah.
And you're doing amazing things for people. You're helping
Yes.
people.
Well, hopefully for me too. I mean,
Mm.
I'm not so selfless that I go to work for others all the time. I love the work I do, so
Yes.
it's definitely for me as well.
Yes.
I mean, the next thing I'm doing a couple of again surprising myself. I'm co-editing an existential anthology, which is going to take a long time. But after that, before I started my doctorate, I was writing my 18th novel. And it's still there, and I've written 20,000 words of it, and it only needs to be 80,000. So hopefully I'll get back to that at some point. And I do want to, and my editor would like me to. So I haven't stopped wanting to make things out of nothing, which is what writing is. It's just making something up where it wasn't there before.
And I mean, this might be a really big question to answer at the end. I mean, I'm sure you've read when the body holds the score, body keeps the score, and
Yeah.
Gabor Mate's work.
Mm.
Um, what do you feel about that in terms of your own illnesses? I know that's a difficult question.
Okay, so two things. One is there's some really interesting black psychologists, black women psychologists in the States speaking up now and saying, well, not to say that Bessel van der Kolk's work hasn't been useful, but there were a lot of black African American women doing and talking about that work long before he was. And it would be great if we were giving them the status that we gave
Mm,
the white man, as we often do.
yeah.
Gabor Mate is slightly trickier. As someone so where I did my doctorate also does one of the country's few masters in autism studies. Um, and Gabor Mate's thinking around neurodiversity, where he says it's all to do with trauma, or at least I've seen him
Yeah.
saying that. It may
Yeah.
have been, I'm sure when he writes about it, he's more nuanced, but
Yeah.
I've definitely heard that line. I think is problematic because, yes, our bodies do experience trauma, and yes, our bodies do go through different things, but I've probably survived because of Western medicine. And Western medicine also is pretty good at pinpointing DNA difficulties, genetic
Right.
difficulties. So I genuinely have no idea why what's happened to me happened. I didn't have the easiest of childhoods, and I certainly come from intergenerational poverty. But that could just
Mhm.
be generation after generation of terrible dire food. My
Yeah.
nana was 21 when both of her parents died in the Spanish flu epidemic, and she inherited three teenagers she had to look after as well as go to work. Um,
Mm.
I come from generations of people. My mother's mother was in service from the age of 11. Um, I come from generations of people who didn't have great food, so I don't know
Yes.
why my body's lived what it has. Um, my childhood had some difficult things in it, but I also knew I was loved. So my dad was pretty violent. I've talked about this publicly before, but he was, in retrospect, deeply traumatized by a very terrible time in the Second World War. He was a prisoner of war for 4.5 years. These days, we would have, I hope, given him some PTSD support,
Mhm.
but didn't exist in 1945 when they were freed, and it certainly didn't exist in 1963 when I was born. So he never got that support, and it got taken out on the family. I also knew that I was loved by both of my parents, and I was very fortunate to have a very loving mother, particularly when I was very little. My mum was great. That's why she had seven. My mum was great with babies and small kids, less good with teenagers, but by that time, my dad was good with the
That was
teenagers. So,
like my sister. She just loves a baby.
yeah. So, as long as you've got one parent for any stage of your life, I
Yeah.
reckon you're probably okay. And I think that's what I got. I had a mother who loved having babies and toddlers and little kids, and a father who was really only interested when you could have a proper conversation from about 10, 11, 12. And that meant that I got the bad bits, but the really good bits from both of them as well. So maybe I got sick because I was working too hard. I don't think so. Maybe I got sick because I went through some difficult things as a child. Maybe I got sick because my family has generation after generation after generation of poverty. Maybe I got sick because there's just some DNA that's got a little bit of cancer on that particular rung. In
Yeah.
another 100 years, if we don't crucify the planet, we might find out. I'm less interested in that and the why, and much more interested in the what next.
Yes. I think that's helpful for people.
I think we can spend so long trying to dig up why I'm like I am.
Yes.
And it's like, well, now you know that, what are you going to do with it? You've
Well,
still
I'm
got,
very interested in that question because sometimes we're like a dog with a bone. We've buried the bone on a massive, great big beach, and people are like, I've got to dig, I've got to find the bone, I've got to
yeah,
find. And like, and when you found the bone, and let's say, I mean, you might not, but let's say you do, what are you going to do with it?
yeah. That's
Sometimes
when
maybe we don't need to know the why.
I'm not sure we can ever know those whys for sure. I
Yes.
mean, what we know from the neuroscience of attachment, I don't mean trad attachment theory, that was very, very based on white families only and very trad nuclear families and doesn't pay any attention to the families where there's extended families and you're brought up by your sibling. Anyway, um,
Mm.
what we know is that a baby cannot have long-term memory until they're, at least for the first 3 months. So they do think that you have left them forever when you've just popped out of the room.
Mm.
It's not your fault because you cannot be with them all the time. You sometimes do need to go and answer the door or go to the loo or sleep. But the baby doesn't know that. And that's pure neuroscience, and we know that now. And we didn't used to know that. And so, of course, maybe somewhere in me there's this terrible trauma because I was 2 months old and I had colic and no one could soothe me. But if I was to go back and back and back and find that out, what good's it going to do me? I still have to make a choice now about how I'm going to live my life.
Yes. Well, you might, okay, so let's say if we were being very, very kind of clear, well, okay, that makes me understand why, I don't know, I worked very hard to get people to love me
Yeah.
because I was colicky and no one picked me up,
Uh-huh.
or everyone hated me because I screamed all the time. I
Yeah.
don't know.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
That may be true, that may not be true, don't know, doesn't matter. What
Totally.
doesn't matter. So what you're saying is actually it's about the choices you're making now about
Yes.
how you live your life.
And also, I think we have to be careful about this whole let's go back and work out what our parents did wrong. Always what they did wrong. We hardly ever look at what they did right? But let's look at what they did wrong that screwed me up. And it's like, okay. And then you can apply that to your parenting. I have sat in classes with people when we have been looking at attachment theory and the mothers in the room going, oh my God, this is just telling me I got everything wrong. Therapy training can be brutal for people
Oh
because
yeah. Yeah,
it's so
terrible.
hard because they're just sitting there going, I made a mistake. And most people do the best they can.
Yes, I totally agree with that. Most people do the best that they can with the tools that they have.
Exactly. My parents did the very best they could with some pretty dodgy tools, and that's not their fault.
Absolutely.
And then now I'm an adult. What choices am I going to make?
It sounds like you're making very interesting choices.
I'm really pleased with 55-year-old me, who decided at 55 that I could give a foundation course a go. I didn't think I could do a doctorate. I wasn't even thinking I could do a master's.
Yes.
But I thought I could give a foundation course a go. And I would tell anybody now, try the first step, because you don't know that you can't do it. You might believe you can't do it. You might believe it's beyond you, but you don't know you can't. And I would have thought it was beyond me. Turns out it's not.
Fantastic. Well, we could talk forever. It's brilliant. Now, how can people find you?
I'm on Instagram, Stella Duffy Therapy, but I'm also on Instagram as myself, Stella Duffy. Someone else years and years ago got Stella Duffy, don't know who she is. And I have a therapy website, Stella Duffy Therapy. And I've got a blog that I've been writing for decades. I probably should make it into a Substack like everyone else's, but the blog is called Not Writing But Blogging. And that's been there for years. And it's got stuff about...
I haven't found that. I didn't find that.
It's one of the things that show up if you Google Stella Duffy. It comes up fairly early. And it's got loads of stuff. It's got lots of my thinking about cancer over the times that I've had cancers, actually, which I think, and childlessness. And I think people have found those useful as well in the past.
Yeah, thank you. And I love the discipline of self-compassion.
Oh, I'm rubbish at that whole self-love thing. I get really sneery when people talk about it, and I'm like, you're all right for you. You're so lucky. And I do a whole, I grew up poor and blah, blah, blah. So it's been very hard for me to embrace self-compassion, because it's always been a bit like, oh, yummy mummies and all their time off and having a bath with a Chardonnay. And I've been very sneery about it.
Yes, this is very interesting, because I wouldn't say that that's self-compassion.
Oh, I agree. But it is how self-compassion is often talked about, particularly on social media. Bit of me time, bit of chocolate, bit of sitting down. I really don't think self-compassion is that. I think self-compassion and genuine self-care takes actual self-discipline. It takes putting yourself to bed early and putting your phone away. It takes treating oneself like someone who deserves looking after, and sometimes imposing rules. Even though my inner 14, there's a whole chunk about my inner 14-year-old in my book, is going, no, I want to stay up late. I want to do more. I want to work harder. Going, no, it's not good for you. You should go to bed now and get up, and then you can go to the gym. It's attending to the discipline of self-compassion, I think, is super valuable. Yeah.
That sounds like a sort of parent voice.
I think it's a loving parent voice.
Yes, a loving parent voice.
Yes, it's a super loving parent voice, or just a lover voice. That one could love oneself.
Yeah.
And that it doesn't have to be naff, and it doesn't have to be the kind of thing that makes me sneer, and that it isn't about having a bubble bath. It's just, I could love me and care about me, not just... So caring for, I perceive as feeding well, taking to the gym, going to yoga. Yeah. But caring about, takes a lot more generosity.
Thank you so much. And on that note, I'm afraid we're going to have to...
No, thank you so much. It's been really grateful to you for the space.
Being very generous.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming on the podcast.